British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is being investigated by Parliament's standards watchdog over whether he properly declared his wife's shareholding in a childcare company, which stands to benefit from new government policy. Parliament's Commissioner for Standards began the investigation over a declaration of interest on April the 13th, according to a list of open inquiries on its website on Monday. Still in the UK, British wages rising faster than anticipated last month in a move that economists judge may tip the Bank of England towards a further rise in interest rates next month. The Office for National Statistics said the unemployment rate edges up to 3.8%, its highest since the second quarter of 2022, rather than holding at 3.7% expected by economists. For more on these headlines, we cross over to London, where we're joined by Arise business analyst Bode Ososanmi. Good morning, Bode. Thanks for joining us. So, what do you make of the numbers coming out of China, the first quarter GDP?
Well, good morning, Reuters, and thanks for having me on the show. Well, the surge in consumer spending that we saw in Q1 and pick up in factory output helped recovery to stay on track better than expected, despite the headwinds. The pleasant surprise was mainly due to strength of retail sales. In March, we saw that long-awaited reorientation towards consumption. Retail sales soared to 10.6% from a year earlier, much higher than what was expected. The slump was actually expected. Growth is expected to accelerate also in the second quarter due to the low base of comparison from last year when Shanghai was in lockdown, but also as the housing market stabilizes further and consumers rev up spending. Exports still expected to deteriorate, but this period it did quite well, expanded 14.8% year on year, beating expectations of a drop of 5%. Much of the growth was driven by electric vehicle sales and exports to Russia. And indeed, Beijing has a conservative growth target for the year of around 5%. IMF sees 5.2% for 2023 for China. Goldman Sachs keeps its 2023 forecast for China unchanged at 6%. JP Morgan and Citi upgraded their own forecasts by 40 basis points to 6.4% and 6.1%. But it wasn't all good news. Industrial output up 3.9% from a year ago, weaker than 4.4% projected. Some said that's because of the slump in production of microcomputer equipment and declining integrated circuit output, possibly due to US tech restrictions. Growth in fixed asset investment also slowed to 5.1% in Q1, missing expectations, while property investments continued to contract. So there is a bit of a mixed picture when you look at the details, but the People's Bank of England said last week that the economy was on track to grow in line with their expectations, suggesting there is no need for further stimulus, even as government continues its infrastructure investment push as the growth engine. Later this week, we'll see what the PBOC, what they do on their interest rate decision. That will be keenly watched.
Another thing that's being keenly watched, this chips race across the world, the EU Chips Act, is it all about rising protectionism in Europe?
Well, I think it's important for every country today, especially Africa and even developing economies, to have their own chips vision and strategy and proactively begin to position for a different world where chip producers will reign over consumers. Remember, it takes more like 2 to 3 years to really get a factory on the ground. So now nearly 80% of suppliers to Europe operate outside Europe, which is a problem. Today, the share of the EU in global production capacity is below 10%, which of course is not a pleasing statistics for Europe. And we've seen how the US have very vigorously responded with their own act, pushing $200 billion in subsidies over 10 years to push this area, all kinds of, if you like, irresistible credits, tax credits for capital expenses, subsidies to support semiconductor research, development, manufacturing. Definitely, this is going to make Europe very uncomfortable, particularly as the investments in Europe will suddenly look less attractive. So they are pushing a mega 43 billion euro. That, I guess, is what they can afford, but certainly they have to start somewhere. But like I said, it takes a while for any results to come out of this. Building a chip plant is a long process. Attracting talent, scaling up, and so on is not easy. Regulations also play a part. And I think the Asians are a bit, I would say, very much ahead. So you can call this a form of justified protectionism, as of course Europe is trying to put itself in a much better position. Microchips are very, very important in the modern, more digital world, and all the integrated circuits, they are practically everywhere. Cars, trains, aircraft, healthcare, automation, oil and gas, data, communications, everything is going to have microchips. So you really have to know where you are in this space to be relevant in the future.
All right, business analyst Bode Ososanmi.